Hey, Luca here. I have a complicated relationship with nonfiction books. I've always read a lot. Today, of course, as I do research for the newsletter, but even in the past, but not many books. I believe we can trace the controversy back to 2013 2014. At that time, I was a young CTO, extremely hungry for good material. Newsletters and quality articles were less of a thing back then, so for your professional growth, you mostly had books. And boy, did they disappoint me, like all the time. Most of them seemed to me little more than glorified blog posts. The best ideas could fit around 30,000 words and were instead diluted into 50,000 maybe. So, for the following decade, you can count the business books I read literally on my hands. Then, something surprising happened last year. I read 12 books. I can't stress enough how big of a change this was for me. 12 books is probably more than all the business books I had read until then. So, this video is the story of how I unexpectedly became a book reader, why I enjoy doing so now, and the process that works for me. So, let's dive in. And let's start with book clubs, because exactly 1 year ago, we started a book club in the refactoring community. In the club, we pick a book every 2 months, read it on our own, and discuss it all together in a live community call at the end of the period. So, about half of the books I read last year came from it. The book club gave me two things. First, strong accountability. Reading books is now literally part of my job. Book reviews also become newsletter articles, so there is no way I can give up on this. And second, easy selection. For a long time, I had a messy backlog of books I wanted to read, and choosing the next one always felt like a chore. The book club has a board where people can upvote entries, so every time we just pick the most voted one. Easy peasy. The book club activity compounded nicely and unexpectedly with another facet of my life. My wife has always been a big reader. She keeps a book by her bed and always reads a few pages before sleep. This existing habit gave me the perfect anchor for my own newfound one. So I started doing the same, replacing the mindless scrolling on social media and the blitz games on chess.com, which I would invariably lose. After a while, this led to another surprise. My wife and I started talking about the books we were respectively reading. She had always told me about her books, but the fact that now I too was reading something created more common ground and led to more interesting conversations. It's like another mini book club, even if we read different things. And the second thing I want to talk about is flywheels. Because reading now for me has become an incredibly high leverage activity which benefits multiple aspects of my life. It's about learning because it makes me learn new things. It's about community because it makes the refactoring community better. It's about writing because it gives me things to write about in the newsletter. And finally, it's even about family. It improves my relationship with my wife. So the lesson I learned here is to always try to create flywheels and synergies so that 1 plus 1 equals 3. So if you have a habit you're trying to adopt and you're struggling with it, think of how you can get more value out of it. Can you do it with your friends and family? Can you make it useful for something else? Now, this is all part of the why. Another big change in my reading, though, has been in the how. So let's talk about process. As of today, I read books in 4 stages. First, I read the summary. Then I read the full book. Then I write a review. And finally, I extract notes. This looks like a lot of work, but first, I don't do it for all books, and second, for good books is 100% worth it. So let's go through each of these steps. And let's start with the summary. Reading a nonfiction book from top to bottom usually takes around 4 to 5 hours. For many people, this is a big investment, which means two things. First, you should only do it when it's worth it. And second, you better get the most out of it, right? So, whenever I can, that is, whenever it's available, I start the book by reading its summary. There are many services out there which provide summaries. I mostly use short form because it has a nice workflow. I take highlights there, these are sent to Readwise, which in turn are sent to my Notion. A good summary is about 30 minutes reading, which equals to 10 to 15% of the full book. This is a great deal to me for two reasons. First one is that I can stop early if I want, and for most books I start reading, I actually stop there at the summary. I haven't kept track precisely, but I think it's about 60%. And for many of them, I don't even finish the summary. There are so many books out there which I'm not sure I should read for the most disparate reasons. Maybe they're not that good, maybe I know a lot of the topic already, or maybe I'm not that interested in the topic. I can figure out all these things pretty quickly through the summary. Mind you, not perfectly, but 30 minutes spent on the summary put me in a much better place to judge than being 30 minutes into the book. And for many books, I stop there not because I don't like them, but rather because it's enough. I don't have the desire to learn more. The best ones, though, leave me intrigued and I move on to the full thing. So, summaries give me a good way to stop early, which in turn makes me start more books. And the bottom line is positive. I end up reading more full books, full stop. Most of all, reading summaries is time well spent, even if I decide to read the full thing, which leads me to mental structure. The summary acts as a fantastic intro to the book itself. I have found that reading a book after I read the summary is night and day in terms of retention and ease of reading. It is just easier to follow the concepts when you have a good idea of the overall structure. And this is the same reason why many people tell you to go through the table of contents first. This is good advice, but the table of contents is very small, while the summary feels like the right size to create a good mental model of the book in your brain. So, if summaries are that good, why bother reading the full thing? I have found two reasons for this. The first one is obvious, the second, less so. The first reason is that summaries are not enough. They leave out many things, most of all, stories and examples. Take No Rules Rules, for example, which I have already mentioned above. The short form summary is a great summary, one of the best I've ever read. It explains the framework and the main ideas clearly and is organized even better than the book itself. However, it misses the true spirit of the book. No Rules Rules is, first and foremost, a book about Netflix. It contains tens of great examples, humorous stories, practical lessons learned, which all get lost in the summary. So the summary is about the destination, while the book is about the journey, which in Netflix case is 20 years in the making. And the second reason is that books are first and foremost about exposure. I have long complained that non-fiction books are diluted and redundant. While this is largely true, it also has a flip side. That is, you get a lot of exposure to the book's ideas. Being exposed for 4 to 5 hours to some ideas is not the same as going through them in 30 minutes, even if the ideas were exactly the same. Because 5 hours is a sizable time. This leaves you with those ideas installed in your brain and partially running in the background for a long time. The best books leave you thinking on their own terms. You start drawing connections between their ideas and things that happen to you every day. Those ideas now live in your brain exactly because you dedicated several hours to them. So, good retention not only depends on understanding things, it also depends on seeing them over and over for a while, which is exactly what a book does to you, even or especially a diluted one. So, how do I read the actual books? First of all, I usually buy and read the physical one. This is actually kind of recent. I used to do most of my reading on my Kindle, but over time I have found myself drawn more and more to physical ones. It's probably about these three things. First, it's about the library. I like seeing my physical library grow and go through all the things I've read over time. It's a small thing, but it adds to the benefits of the habit. The second one is the nightstand. I keep the books I'm reading by the bed and read mostly before I sleep. Of course, I could keep my Kindle there as well, but it's not just the same thing. And finally, the tactile feeling, of course. I like the feeling of physical books. Also, I prefer larger ones and almost never buy pocket editions. The main drawback of physical books, of course, you may have guessed it, is highlighting, which is 100 times more cumbersome than on the Kindle. While on the Kindle I can use the same readwise workflow I use for pretty much everything else, on physical books I usually take pictures or more recently a highlighter tape and describe later. However, this is not as bad as you may think because maybe surprisingly I don't take many highlights for two reasons. First is that I feel that highlighting takes something away from the pleasure of reading. And second, by the time I'm reading the physical book, I have already done a lot of highlighting on the summary. So I tend to highlight probably 10 to 20 passages in each book, which lie at the intersection of super interesting stuff and stuff that is missing from the summary. And it's usually particularly good examples. And finally, let's talk about the review. After I finish the book, if it's a book club one, we have a live community call where we discuss our thoughts about it. The conversation is driven by a few simple questions actually, like what did you like the most, what was the most surprising, or what could be better for you. People talk about how the book relates to their experiences, and the whole chat is both interesting and useful. Different people generally point at different things and make me notice things I had overlooked. Finally, for each book I write my own review, which doubles as a short summary, and I publish it on the newsletter. Book reviews are among the articles I enjoy the most writing, and I don't exactly know why. I believe it's because I grew up reading many reviews. I read maybe hundreds of movie reviews by Roger Ebert and probably just as many tech ones, for example from John Gruber or MJ Siegler. So writing book reviews is another of those habits that has multiple benefits for me. It creates content for refactoring, it clears my thoughts about the book and the topics it covers, and it creates a growing library of personal reviews similar to the one by Nat Eliasson, which I pretty much envy. Would I write them anyway if I didn't have the newsletter and the book club? That's a tough question, but I would say yes. But probably this would be less deep and include less of the summary part. Now, the very final step in the process is taking the review and extracting a few evergreen notes from it. This is something I do with all of my writing, and I explained it in another newsletter article which I'm linking in the video notes. So book reviews make no exception. Individual notes are incredibly useful for future articles, for adding on social media, and as a general repository of my own thoughts. By now I have more than 600 of them. And that's it for today. I wish you a great week, and as always, thank you for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.